All right. First of all, before I start, I just want to introduce everyone to Steve, named after one of our favorite state representatives. But anyway, he's going to be around at the conference, and so if I'm like, hey, will you take a picture with my stuffed jackalope? You should just humor me and do it, because it would be great. So, this is Elvis. He came from the airport gift shop. We rescued him yesterday, but so just a heads up there. Okay, so a lot of times people talk about something they know really well. A lot of people talk about their upbringing with religion, and I wasn't brought up religious, so that was kind of out as far as a topic for me. I did grow up in a house where we went on ghost hunts and talked to dead people, but not religious. So I have no interesting background story in this. I could, ramble on about sitting in cemeteries when I was 8 years old. I'm not going to do that because it's just weird. But, you're supposed to talk about something you know, right? It's going to be way easier, and I'm actually way more stressed about talking here than I have been at the couple of other places I've talked about, and I don't know why that is. Maybe just because I know so many of you, so there's a lot of expectation. So I'm going to talk about something I know really well, and this is not going to be the most important talk you hear today by a long shot, but we are all going to get to geek out for like 40 minutes, which I think is just a needed part of any convention that you go to. So, okay, can everyone hear me right now? Because I'm not real cool with my. Okay. So I am going to talk about what the free thought community can learn from Harry Potter. This is not an all-expansive or inclusive lessons, because there are 7 books, and this is 40 minutes long. So I'm going to focus on 3 different aspects or parts I have it broken into. The first part is going to be skepticism. The second part will be secular humanism, and the third part is activism. So yeah, we'll just get started with that. The other working title for this talk is Why Hermione Granger is the Most Badass Fictional Character of All Time, which could actually just be its own talk and should be its own talk, and maybe will be at some point here. Okay, so I'm going to guess most of you are on the internet, and you have all seen this meme, from the books, where Hermione is just a complete badass and talks about the burden of proof falling on the person making the claim. So in this section, it's when Mr. Lovegood is talking about the Deathly Hallows, and she's just saying that it's ridiculous, and he says, well, she says, prove that they're real, and he says, well, prove that they're not real. And I think this is something that we hear a lot from, I hear a lot from Christians, is, well, prove that God doesn't exist. Well, that's not how it works. You are the one who thinks that your imaginary friend exists, so you are the one who should prove that he exists. But anyway, Hermione just nails that right there, and says, how can I possibly prove it doesn't exist? Do you expect me to get a hold of all of the pebbles in the world and test them? You can claim anything is real if the only basis for believing in it is that nobody's proved it doesn't exist. Not a new concept. Russell's teapot is another example of this. There's a lot of examples, but this is really important when we're talking to, not just Christians, people that disagree in general, or are making claims, that the burden of proving that falls on them, it doesn't fall on us. Okay, so also, when you're a skeptic, it is really important to check your sources. I have up here a picture of the Quibbler, which is essentially a tabloid, and eventually did, write some authentic, useful articles, but by and large, it's, a tabloid. That's what it does. But I see us doing this. I see us posting, everyone's pretty good. The Onion is not a news source. It's funny. Everyone, I think, has figured that one out. But there's Daily Current, and I see people constantly just posting this as true factual things. It's satire. And there's a few other ones too. But so yeah, it's really important to check your sources and make sure you are using a respectable, reviewed sources. And on that, you can't automatically trust mainstream media either. CNN is good for some things. It's not good for other things. But again, you just need to be checking into it. You can't just take them at their word. The example here was with the Daily Prophet, where Rita Skeeter, and the Daily Prophet was like the serious paper, right, as opposed to the Quibbler, which was the tabloid. And they had just the same kinds of gossipy, tabloid-esque articles, like this one about Dumbledore's dark secrets being revealed. So just something to watch out for. Okay, so I want to talk about confirmation bias. And there's so many examples of that in these books that it's kind of crazy, but I picked 4. What confirmation bias is the tendency to search for or interpret information in a way that confirms one's preconceptions, leading to statistical errors. So, when you really want something to, like, you are set on that this is what happened, and then all of a sudden all the little pieces that could be interpreted different ways, you interpret them the way that makes your hypothesis correct. It's kind of like that. So if we go back to looking at the first book, we were all convinced that Snape was evil and doing all these terrible things. And why were we so convinced of that? Because the kids, Hermione and Ron and Harry, every time something happened, they kind of twisted it so he was doing something that was bad. And in reality, excuse me, there were always reasons for what Snape was doing. I mean, yeah, he was kind of a creepy dude, but that doesn't mean he's a bad person. So that was book 1, and then a recurring theme throughout pretty much the whole series with Snape. But Malfoy was the same thing. When they were so sure in Chamber of Secrets that he was the heir of Slytherin. And so they kept finding all these things that they thought meant Malfoy was the heir of Slytherin. He wasn't at all. But they were what, 10 or 11, so I'm gonna give them that as an excuse. Okay, so then we move on to Prisoner of Azkaban and Sirius Black. I'm pretty sure I was convinced throughout almost the entire book that he was coming to kill Harry, because that's what the confirmation bias did. But really he was trying to contact him because he was his godfather. And he actually was not a mass murderer. But, by them taking every little thing that he did and kind of twisting it to fit their idea of what's going on is what happened. And then, my last example would be Harry. This is also from Prisoner of Azkaban, but when he can't produce a Patronus, and then they use the time turner, and he goes back, and then he can produce a Patronus, but he thinks it was his dad that did it, and that's what kind of made him able to do it. So it's kind of also this crazy mindfuck thing, but yeah. So, and there's a million examples of this in the books, because for one thing, they're books and they're trying to get you to, grasp onto this idea so they can be like, whoa, that's not what happened. Okay, so also with skepticism, I really like that throughout this whole series, they weren't just like, oh, we're magic and we do whatever we want. It was really reinforced that that magic takes a lot of work. You have to study, you need to do research, and you need to practice it to be good at magic. You're not just magical and it happens. And so I think in a way it's a lot like technology. Like, technology is not that hard to use, but you have to put in the effort to, figure out how to use it, to practice it and whatnot for it to work. And I think, with our skepticism too, we need to be researching. It's not enough to just skim headlines and go with that as, our talking points. We need to do research. We need to study what's going on to have a good background, a good basis for knowledge. Okay, my last note on being a good skeptic is, okay, so we remember back to the first slide about Hermione where she is questioning the Deathly Hallows, right? But part of a good skeptic is accepting when you've been proven wrong. If someone can prove to you that that's what she was asking for, right? She was saying, you can't prove it doesn't exist. I need proof that it does exist. And so it turns out that the Deathly Hallows did exist, and Hermione was totally cool with, being like, I was wrong. And that's a super important part that I think some of us miss, is accepting that we were wrong and not just beating that horse just because she can. Okay, so we're going to move on to secular humanism, part 2. So this is another thing that is really, it's throughout the books. But there are people that exemplify the best and the worst of humanity. The best people are not perfect, and they make mistakes. And sometimes those mistakes cause people to die. But basically, people have fallible, imperfect behavior and problems. Most people are not good or evil. Most people are on, this gray scale of it. But I think a lot of times we're really quick to be like, well, this person's a good person, so they couldn't possibly have done this. Or this person is a bad person, so they just can't do anything right. And I don't think that's the case. So some examples, if we look at Tom Riddle, before he was ever Lord Voldemort, he was this charismatic kid, right? That he was super smart. Everyone thought he was going places. And I guess he did go places. But then he turned into the Dark Lord, like the most evil wizard of all time. So, there's that good and bad in people, and so that's important to remember. And it's usually not going to be this extreme. This is a really extreme example of that. Okay, but so Dumbledore, everyone loves Dumbledore, and he's a great person, and everyone looked up to him like he, is the most powerful wizard of his time and everything. But when we go into Dumbledore's cast, he spent some time with Grindelwald, who was a dark wizard and did kind of a lot of bad stuff. And Dumbledore got involved with some of that. And so I think it's important, that lesson is that you can't judge someone forever for what they do. I'm sure most people have a skeleton in their closet, or, have done something not up to their current standards. Myself, for example, mine would be, now I'm very careful to be PC and to be really respectful to people. But when I was in high school, I used the R word all the time, and I'm really embarrassed that I did that. And granted, it was like 15 years ago, but you just can't keep judging someone for the same thing over and over and over. People move on, and it's important that we accept that, even if they have some bad stuff in their past. James Potter, who is like perfect, right? That's how he's portrayed. He, died young, tragically. Him and Lily were this like perfect wizard couple. But he tormented Snape. He bullied him. He, just made his life a living hell. But that's not really the part about James Potter that anyone remembers. What they remember is that he died for his son, basically, and for the cause, for the Order of the Phoenix.
Josh?
Any time out? Okay. It's not my computer, I'm sorry.
Everybody pray.
Everyone pray, and we'll see if we can get it working again.
There we go.
Praise.
Oh, did it just reset?
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Nope. James Potter. Thank you for your prayers.
They worked. It's amazing, maybe. Okay, yes. Yay, your prayers all work. Thank you for using them for this instead of like, I don't know, solving world hunger or something like that. Okay, so yeah, young James Potter, he's this hero that died tragically young, but also did some crappy stuff. And so it's just another example of like these people that, you know, there's a little bit of bad, like, I don't know, I don't like using the word like there's some bad in this person, but we're a mix. There's not real all good people and not real all bad people. There's probably a few, I mean, like Hitler or whatever, but they are the exception, they're not the rule. Okay, so secular humanism, again, it's really important that good people work together to create change, regardless of differences. Obviously, Harry and Snape had a little bit of tension throughout, I don't know, most of the series. But they were still working for the same thing, even when they didn't realize they were. And even within the whole Order of the Phoenix, there were other people that, like no one like Mundungus, but you know, he was there. And Snape and Sirius had tension, but they realized the greater good. They realized they need to put aside their differences because they need to fix the world that they were living in. And so it's no different within your atheist group or your whatever group, it doesn't matter, your knitting circle. Not everyone's gonna agree all the time, not everyone's gonna be friends, but if you have a common goal, if you have something you're working for, it is just more important than all of that stuff. So it's important to put it aside and do some work. And so just to kind of hit that home, I have a Dumbledore quote because he's real good at, you know, the quotes that really hit that home. So we are only as strong as we are united, as weak as we are divided. Lord Voldemort's gift for spreading discord and enmity is great. We can fight only by showing an equally strong bond of friendship and trust. Differences of habit and language are nothing at all if our aims are identical and our hearts are open. It's one of my favorite quotes from the book, and I think it really, really just applies to humanism. Okay, so in the same train of thought, equality is important and it must be fought for. A lot of times people are like, you know, why do you have to make a big stink about, I don't know, a snowplow or whatever? And the thing is, it's wrong, and what they're doing is wrong. They're excluding a portion of the community with taxpayer dollars. That's why it's important, but it's important to actually fight for it. A lot of people want to complain about things, or you know, they're upset by it, but nothing changes if no one takes a step forward and says, okay, I'm gonna just talk to someone about this and see what we can do. I mean, a lot of times that's all it is. It's not like you have to reinvent a wheel or anything. It's just, you need to have a conversation, or it's just gonna continue. And so I don't know what the point in complaining about things that just continue when you're not making any effort to stop that cycle there. So kind of the example in Harry Potter is with the pureblood supremacy. And when I was showing this to Eric, he thought this means I'm promoting pureblood supremacy, which I am not, for the record. But this was a pretty common thing that came up in the books, like talking about there were the pureblood wizarding families, there were the Muggleborns, and there were the half-blood wizards, and there was a lot of divide between these, mostly on the end of the pureblood wizards who felt like everyone should just be pureblood. So, a lot of people throughout the books took a stand on that, and they stood up for their friends, or they, you know, said something when someone called them a blood or something like that. Okay, allies are super important. We all know Christians that are, okay, my example is one of my best friends, her name is also Amanda, but we agree on, I don't know, 99.9% of everything except for the God thing. And that's just because she is scared that she wouldn't go to heaven when she died. But she's an ally, and she's an important ally to have because she, it doesn't matter if she's a Christian or not, but because she is, people are a little more willing to listen to her when she's like, oh no, one of my friends is an atheist and she's an awesome person. So I think it's important. And we've seen this with the LGBTQ community as well, where allies are really important to just say, hey, it's okay to be gay, even if you're not. It's still important to help others feel like it is, and to get that word out. And sometimes there's someone who, due to privilege or whatever, has more of a voice, and they can use that to further a cause. So my example here was Hermione with SPEW, which is her Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. She was not a house elf, but she stood up for the house elves, and she created her society to further them and try to free them. And it wasn't the most popular thing ever, but she still did it because she felt really strongly about it. Okay, so we're on to part 3, which means you are almost done listening to me. So, okay, so part 3 is activism. And this was really hard for me to just pick examples from, because really the whole series is about activism. Like I wrote here, it's about a bunch of kids that change the fucking world, because they do. And that's pretty much the most activism ever, I think. But, okay, so we're gonna break it down into a few examples. Or lessons about activism. We'll go with that. Okay, so one of those is stand up for what you believe in, no matter how unpopular that makes you. We talked about Hermione and SPEW a little bit, just very shortly ago. But yeah, that did not make her popular at all. Even her friends were like, I don't know what you're doing. This is so weird. And most of the house elves also were not in favor of it. Maybe it was not the best organization ever, or the best place for Hermione to put her efforts, but again, it was something she felt strongly about. Okay, so do we remember when Harry was telling everyone Voldemort was back, and it was a really unpopular opinion? And the paper tried to ruin him, and just by writing lies about him, and no one at school would talk to him, and everything. But he stood with his story, right? He wasn't like, oh yeah, guys, you're right, Voldemort's probably not coming back. But no, it was important because he didn't want his friends to die. So he stood by his word, and he went with it, no matter how much backlash he got. And then I had to throw in Phineas Black, because I have a 7-month-old puppy named Finn. He's black. So I needed to add him in. This is not Phineas Nigelus Black, who was headmaster at Hogwarts. This is actually his son, but he promoted Muggle rights, which, as far as in the pureblood families, such as the Blacks, that was very unpopular. So he was actually removed from his family tree, burned out of the tapestry, so there was no record of him being there, because he chose to support the rights of Muggles, of someone else that was different than him. And I don't think that's so different from people that, their parents kicked them out because they're an atheist, or people who, I have a friend who, he told his wife he was questioning, not even that he was an atheist, just that he was questioning, and within the week she served him divorce papers. So, yeah, I mean, bad stuff happens, and so these really aren't that far off from real life situations, even though they're about house elves and wizards. Okay, so another big part of activism, I think, is showing support for those that are willing to speak out on the issues important to you. We all know not everybody can do that. We know that there are people that have to be closeted for whatever reason, maybe because they don't want to get kicked out of their parents' house, or maybe because they're not financially stable at the moment and they can't afford to lose their job, which is, a possibility. There are a number of people that have a number of reasons, but there are people that are willing to speak out. There's people that do, and it's important that we show them some support, because it's really hard. and they deal with a lot of backlash for it, and they're dealing with it for you. It's not just for them. So I think that's a really important lesson. And you know, Harry and Ron and Hermione really did this throughout the whole series. There were a lot of times where everyone thought that Harry, I don't know, you know, that he'd just gone off the deep end or whatever. But they stuck by him, and they would support him. They hung out with him when no one else would. And yeah, they had their tips because they're friends, and that's what happens. But by and large, they always stood by him, and that's really important. Okay, an activist has to prioritize, because you just can't change every single thing in the world no matter how much you want to. So you need to prioritize. You need to pick some things that are the most important to you, or are the most, are a higher priority, I guess. So Hermione is my example with prioritizing. So if we remember in the first book, her priority was, now if you two don't mind, I'm going to bed before either of you come up with another clever idea to get us killed or worse, expelled. Okay? So then later, Miss Granger says, you said to us once before that there was time to turn back if we wanted to. We've had time, haven't we? This was before she quit school and went with Harry to find the Horcruxes. So she had a big turnaround. I mean, she grew up some in there, but you know, at this point in her life, you know, the first slide, at that point in her life, getting expelled was worse than dying. And then in this stage of her life, she realizes that going and saving the wizarding world from Lord Voldemort is more important than finishing school. And this is for someone whose school and education is exceptionally important for. So I think that's important. I think a lot of us get burnt out because we try to fix everything, or we try to work on every single project. And sometimes that's because you get guilted if you don't. If you're like, my plate is full and I totally support what you're doing, but I don't have time to put into it. And a lot of times there's some guilt with that that's, you know, kind of, and I get it, they're just trying to recruit people the same way that I would, but we can't put out every single fire, so we need to pick some and work on those. And then when they're done, we find another fire and work on those. Yeah. 5 minutes, really? Oh, okay. I'm almost done. We're all good. Okay, so one of the most important things I think about being an activist, but also just being a human in general, is having integrity. If you need to be someone that people trust and is honest and people can go to. If you're going to try to get people to work with you on a cause or believe what you have to say about a cause, like, you need to have integrity. I use this picture because you know, Harry was forced to write I must not tell lies when he really wasn't telling lies, but he just took that. It was kind of badass there. Okay, more on activism is never underestimate someone's ability to be an activist based on appearance or charisma. And I use Mr. Neville Longbottom as an example because he, you know, was the awkward kid that nobody really hung out with, and he danced by himself and did a lot of weird stuff. And he
was the hero of the entire series.
But yes, I'm getting there.
Okay.
And then he's the one who took the sword of Godric Gryffindor and, you know, killed the snake. So, don't underestimate him. I would have wrote Neville off in like the first book. Like, I kind of thought he was just gonna die or something. But I was wrong because I judged him based on his doofy kind of thing he had going on. So, and on that note, never underestimate the ability of a badass female. But seriously, it takes a lot of people, a lot of different kinds of people to make anything happen. And these ladies changed the wizarding world. They did a lot of awesome stuff. And I know a lot of women who also do a lot of awesome stuff. So, my sources, very short list. Anywho, this is me, and you can contact me and I would love to talk about nerdy stuff with you. And I kind of blog at Godless Revolution and Thinking Enslaved. So, that's everything for my talk. I have like what, 3 minutes?
Sure.
Does anyone have a question about Harry Potter?